Want to welcome everybody to today's NASCA's webinar covering how state conservation agencies are assisting with local working group process throughout the country. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on the NASCA website. We have two excellent presenters today. We're excited to hear from the rest of you with your questions and also sharing about local work group efforts in your state. This webinar will last 60 minutes, but we'll have plenty of time for questions and idea sharing afterwards. Please save your questions until we're done with both presenters, but feel free to enter questions into the chat box at any time. Want to remind everybody to stay on mute during the presentations. And with that, let me introduce both of today's speakers. Mike Baden started as the North Central and Northeast Regional Manager for the Washington State Conservation Commission in January of 2015. Prior to that, Mike spent 18 years working with conservation districts. During his time with the districts, he worked in several areas, including conservation planning, project management, grant administration, contracting, invasive weed control, and property management. Mike currently serves as the commission representative to the Washington State NRCS State Technical Advisory Committee, and he is the commission liaison to NRCS for local work groups and task order agreements. Also with us today, Brooke Myres is the Field Operations and Program Development Manager for the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources Conservation Districts section. Brooke has been part of that team since 2016, where she started in a grant-funded field position working on farm bill programs in Joint Conservation District and NRCS offices. She's passionate about conservation education and spreading awareness for conservation districts. Part of Brooke's role in managing the South Carolina Local Work Group Committee with a mission of improving local work group process in South Carolina. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Baden for the first presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike, as I try to make sure I'm sharing what I need to here. Hopefully you all can see that. Great. Awesome. Thanks, Kaylee. So, well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, everyone. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to join this morning just to share a little bit about how the Washington State Conservation Commission is working and engaging in local work groups here in our state. What I was going to plan to do is just talk a little bit about, kind of the nuts and bolts of how we're engaging in local work groups, and then talk a bit more about how we are trying to help local work groups to engage on problems and challenges that have faced us and try to move us continue to move us to a better place in the future. All right, so with that, I will go ahead and get started here. So in our state, our local work groups are basically organized by NRCS teams. So in Washington State, NRCS is organized into 10 multi-county, multi-conservation district teams. So the local work groups are then organized along the boundaries of those teams. So in some of our local work groups, we may have 2 counties, 2 conservation districts, all the way up to teams that include 5, 6, 7 conservation districts or counties. Each of those teams has a district conservationist that oversees the field offices in each of those counties, with a number of NRCS staff located in those satellite field offices. But it has created unique challenges for us in the state about approaching local work groups, because when we come together for a local work group with multiple teams, multiple counties, multiple conservation districts. Although the teams are sort of organized along natural resource concerns and resources and such, it doesn't always end up that way. So we often have competing priorities, even within a local work group. So that's something that we've been working on and trying to improve as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So with us in the commission, one of the main ways that we support local work groups is by providing facilitation and logistical assistance to the local conservation district, local work group chair, and the district conservationist for whatever team we're working with. So for a number of years now, we've been kind of more and more becoming the facilitators of these meetings, allowing the district chair and the NRCS staff to be more back up, answer questions, provide resources, and not have to worry so much about the actual facilitation of the meeting, such as timekeeping, note taking, keeping things moving. We've been doing that. We do a lot of facilitation in the state. So our team of regional managers are the ones that conduct that. And I think it's really been helpful to a lot of these local work groups to have that third-party facilitation. That also gives us an opportunity before local work group season really starts, which for us is typically January through May when our local work groups are held, to work with NRCS leadership to lay out a plan for the year and to get engaged at an earlier time frame to help shape how the local work groups will work. In the past, we've utilized our facilitation services have been utilized through a cooperative agreement with NRCS, what we call task orders. We've actually gotten paid for that facilitation work. That's kind of what the little picture is there on the side, is how our task order works. We didn't do that this year because we found that it's just fitting well just in our normal course of work as regional managers to help provide this service. But we have done that in the past, and it did work well when we did that. Local work groups do not have to use our facilitation. It would come from a request from either the local work group chair or the district conservationist for the commission to come in and help facilitate. We facilitate in a number of ways. According to the guidance that's given to us from the state office, we help put together session designs. We talk over with the local work group chair and the district conservationist what the session objectives would be, and try to put together a session design or agenda that will help us to get to the outcomes that we're really looking for. So there's a lot of back and forth conversations before the local work group ever happens on how that facilitation will work and how that session design will play out. We assign roles and responsibility to each of our parties on how we're going to interact during that local work group meeting. So as I mentioned, our state, probably like a lot of you, our state NRCS leadership provides local work group guidance each year, usually in the fall of the year or early winter. This information will be sent out to local group chairs to understand the objectives and what must be done during the local work group meeting. So we get a list of things that have to be done. We're going to talk a bit more later about how we're trying to make local work groups more valuable, but we do get a list of what needs to be done. That includes for us, it talks about the district conservationist or NRCS providing an activity report of the last 2 fiscal years. We talk about identifying natural resource concerns, natural resource needs, and then one of the big things that we do is each local work group gets a pot of funding provided to them by the state leadership through EQIP that each local work group is assigned to prioritize for their local work group. This is just an example of what that might look like for us. So in addition to a number of national and state funding pools that have been established, so the national fund pools like the National Air Quality Initiative, those types of things, our state has also assigned a number of statewide funding pools that would be applicable to all producers or all applicants statewide. And then each local work group has provided a smaller pot of funding that would be used to fill gaps in the state and national fund pools that each local work group is able to prioritize at the local level. So that's a big part of the local work groups is working through this allocation process for the funding pools that would be specific to those local work groups, up to 2. Through the facilitation process, sometimes we also have things that pop up. The commission has provided support on building a local work group natural resource concern survey in the past, where each local group has sent out that survey to their constituents to get a pre-meeting feel for what folks feel the natural resource concerns are, and then we have a wider swath of responses rather than just who was able to attend the meeting. And we've also in the last couple of years been able to each local work group has been able to submit a project proposal through Inflation Reduction Act funding in our state, and our regional managers will often facilitate follow-up meetings to help local work groups put together those proposals for their area. So even beyond just the facilitation of the meeting, the commission has tried to provide support for however we can to local work groups and NRCS to help the local work groups be successful. All that being said, none of these concerns, these challenges we're working through are probably common concerns that everyone's seeing nationwide. The answers we're trying to fit in and come up with they're not rocket science. They're what we're hoping are kind of common sense ways to approach some things. But it's honestly, it's been slow. It's been slow. We've gotten into a position where, you know, although local work groups have been important to us over the years, it's really, we've kind of just been in a check the box mode for a while, and we're finding that people are less and less understanding of what the local work group means and how they can participate and what their participation means. So I'm just going to talk about 4 quick areas where we're finding some of the challenges and working through them. One of them is just awareness of the meeting. We often hear that people don't know about the meeting. So in our state, NRCS is required to advertise through media the dates and the times and locations of our local work groups, but it doesn't always get out to producers. So we're really trying to work closer with the local work group chair and the conservation district to really doing a better job of outreach about the meetings way ahead of time, getting out to their mailing list, getting information to producer groups and folks like that about just when the meeting is going to be and a really more personalized invitation to come. And also we're trying to do a better job of identifying dates and times that actually work. Just like a lot of folks, we're holding these meetings usually in the spring when folks are getting out on tractors, and every nice day counts to the producers and the landowners that are taking part in this, that we'd like to take part in this meeting. So we're trying to do a better job of finding times and days that actually work for these folks, that doesn't interfere with their priorities on their own schedules. Another big question we've gotten over the years, just as kind of a lack of understanding about the local work group has kind of crept into us, is what on earth is the local work group anyway? We often get this question: why am I here? Why should I come? We're trying to do a better job of establishing what the local work group really is. You know, a subdivision of the State Technical Advisory Committee. It's your feedback gets fed up to the statewide leadership for NRCS. So your input really, really matters when folks are making decisions. And we're also trying to, to show them that their input truly is valued and it truly is important, and we want to hear from you. And to just, again, try to give a better understanding at the beginning of these meetings and even pre-meeting to help folks understand how their input informs higher level decisions in the state. So even at our case, the local work group themselves have really had in a lot of cases to refamiliarize themselves with local work group guidance and policies to get back to what the intent really is. We've also found that sometimes resources are lacking for folks to make informed decisions at these local work group meetings. A lot of folks are just there going, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be making decisions on. I don't really know enough to be able to make these decisions that you're asking us to do. How do I know what the resource concerns are in our local work group? How do I know what it is in this county compared to this county, since we're in multi-county teams? We've been trying to do a lot better job of providing those resources. One of those, just a basic, just common knowledge thing is we want to make sure that everyone knows who everyone is around the table, so that folks know where they can get their questions answered during those meetings and know who the players are. We want to provide more opportunities to share new or upcoming changes in the NRCS work in the state, in the conservation district work in the state, all sorts of different things as well. We're really trying to do a better job of taking time to hear from landowners and producers to understand the challenges that they've been facing, so that as we're making decisions at the local work group level, they're decisions that help to really overcome and to address the challenges that the folks that will be signing up for contracts and such are facing on the ground. We're trying to provide things like maps and data so that they can have in front of them what they need to know to help them make decisions between different priorities that they may have and where the money or where the resources would best be spent within the local work group. And we've really been trying to make sure that we don't assume that everything we're discussing is understood by our audience. We love to talk in acronyms. We love our language. We love our terminology and our programs and all of this kind of stuff. But a lot of times the people around the table just don't understand that. And we fell into a rut a lot of times of just talking over people's heads to where their heads are just spinning and they walk out of the meeting going, what did I even just provide? What did I even just participate in? What did I get out of that meeting? What do I know? So we're really trying to do a better job of taking the time to offer time for questions, and no matter when the questions come, so that we can make sure that people have that information that they need when we're there. And we're also trying to make sure that each local work group is aware of opportunities that are available to them so that they can take advantage of those things. One of the examples I mentioned was the opportunity to submit a proposal specific to the local work group for Inflation Reduction Act funding. Or we've had RCPPs born out of local work group discussions, things like that, making them aware of what's available so that they can take advantage of those opportunities. And probably the biggest thing that we're really trying to work on is just providing value in our local work group meetings, really trying to go beyond the basics. And this has been the hardest nut to crack, because we even see it across our district conservationists, is that, well, sometimes they want this to be a checkbox. They want the meetings to go quickly, to get through it. It's something we have to do. Let's get through it. Let's get the information we need, and let's move on. But we've really been, finding, like a lot of folks probably have, that people need to know why they need to come. What is the value that is brought to their time for coming? Because everyone's busy. Everyone's busy. How do you make the meeting valuable for people to come? If they're just here to just divvy up a pot of funding, how does that affect 50, 60, 70% of the people in the room? Those kinds of things. So we want to allow a lot of time for brainstorming, a lot of time for questions. We want to give everyone a voice. Sometimes we've had just a misnomer. So when people don't understand what the local work group is about, sometimes people have thought that the local work group was just an opportunity to come and complain about government and how inefficient government is and everything that's going wrong. And sometimes those folks get shut down. And then, although we have to get through our objectives, we want to run a clean meeting. If we don't give people a voice, then they don't see a reason for them to come and participate. So we're trying to make sure that everyone has a voice to air their thoughts, to ask their questions, to do things that will help them to feel like they've been heard at the meeting. I had a meeting this year, just a couple weeks ago, where a dairy farmer came out of the meeting going, this was the best meeting we ever had. I felt like we had the opportunity to talk. I felt like we weren't just getting shut down, and that we weren't just getting a bunch of excuses made for things that haven't been good or for the concerns that we have. And she was like, boy, I can't wait for next year. We're going to talk with you about better ideas for next year and things like that. We've been trying to provide more of an opportunity for partners to share, because we're realizing, again, that the local work group and the NRCS funding are only just a piece of the puzzle that is available to landowners. And the local work group becomes a really, really good place for conservation districts to share about their programs, for the Conservation Commission to share about what funding and what opportunities are available through conservation districts through our programs, for our Department of Natural Resources, our Department of Ecology, our Department of Fish and Wildlife, our Extension Service, all these people that come as partners to our meeting, to be able to share what resources they have available for landowners as well, so that the participants of the local work group get a better picture of the big picture, and not just the NRCS. I mean, why does the local group just have to be about NRCS when it can be about how we all work together to meet our natural resources goals and priorities? We also schedule follow-up meetings if needed. Sometimes just one meeting is not enough time to get through everything that we want to get through, not enough time to get through all the questions we have, or not enough time to get the resources put together that would help the local work group to be able to make better informed decisions. Sometimes we have to go do some homework and get some information back out. Then we may call a second shorter meeting to kind of get through some of those questions that are out there as well. So the commission we a lot of times will help facilitate the scheduling of those meetings. And then we also ask for feedback. We haven't always been good about asking for feedback from participants about how they thought the meeting went. We hear it afterwards that, like, I don't know what happened at that meeting. Why did I come? That's 3 hours of my time I'll never get back. So we've been trying to do a better job of asking for feedback. What would be important for you to hear in the next time we come together? What do you want to hear about? Yes, we have the things we have to do as part of our local work group, but what else do you want to hear about that's going to make it worth your time to attend this meeting? And we really, over the last couple of years, have really, really tried to do that. And we take notes on that, and we try to integrate that into the agendas for the next year, so that we're not just hitting just those basics, but we've had people come in and said, what is CSP? What even is CSP? What is EQIP? What are we even talking about here? And we're trying to give better time and a better ear to those questions that come up. And I think it's going to pay off. I mean, like I said, this is all a work in progress for us. It's not really being adopted in all areas as quickly. We're at the commission, we're working closer with NRCS to help share what we see as facilitators and what value we can bring as facilitators to help integrate some of these ideas to help make these meetings go smoother and be more valuable. And I think we're coming along, but we are working on it, and I think we're being more intentional as we learn to do more and more of this stuff to help make these meetings not just what NRCS needs in the basic level, but help make them valuable for the folks that are going to come as well, kind of across the spectrum. So that's what I kind of have for now. I will stop it there, and we can have questions later on.
Okay, fantastic stuff. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Again, for those attending, if you have questions, if you want to enter those into the chat box, we'll take those after our next speaker. Or if you have experiences to share from your state in working with the local work group process, we definitely want to hear about that as well. Okay, let's turn it over to Brooke from South Carolina.
All right. Everyone hear me? You hear me, Mike? Pull up my presentation real quick. Okay, can you see my screen? I assume yes. Thank you, Mike. Okay, great. All right. As Mike said, I'm Brooke Myres, and I work for the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources Conservation Districts. And part of my job is assisting with the South Carolina Local Work Group Committee, which I will be sharing mostly about that with you guys today. There we go. So first of all, I wanted to share a little bit about conservation districts in South Carolina, because if NASCA has taught me anything, it's that states are extremely variable in this matter. The state agency that partners with conservation districts in South Carolina is the Department of Natural Resources Conservation Districts. And in that, we have 6 team members, myself. We have 2 team members that deliver directly to conservation districts. They have 23 conservation districts each. We have a watershed districts coordinator, an administrative assistant, and we have Tyler Brown, who is the program manager over our entire section, and he's also the NASCA president, so you've probably met or seen him around. We have 46 soil and water conservation districts throughout South Carolina, and they conform to county boundaries. They are subdivisions of state government, and they are extremely diverse, whether that is landscape-wise. We have them going from the ocean to the mountains. We have a lot of rural districts. We have very urban districts. We have districts with comparatively small operating budgets, and then some with very large operating budgets. So I try to encourage our districts not to compare themselves to one another, but to use each other as network and support to learn from one another, but not necessarily compare to one another because they're so diverse. We call our commissioners commissioners. I know some states call them directors. So if you hear me throughout the talk talking about commissioners, it may be called something else in your state. We have 2 associations in the state. We have the South Carolina Association of Conservation Districts, which is the group that pulls us all together, all of our 46 districts. And then we have the South Carolina Conservation Districts Employees Association. So local work groups in South Carolina, as many things, the local work groups ebb and flow. So in South Carolina, prior to the South Carolina Local Work Group Committee being formed, we were certainly in an ebb of local work groups in South Carolina. So the routine was kind of that NRCS would send out the bulletin that Mike had mentioned. And in South Carolina, also, each of our 46 districts is considered a local work group. So we have a lot of individual local work groups. So NRCS would send the bulletin with a deadline maybe 2 or 3 weeks out, and then the districts would hurry up to throw something together to have some kind of meeting. The results were not really reported out statewide for all of the local work groups. How results were being utilized wasn't really being reported. I heard many excuses throughout this process of forming this committee. Things like, it's how we've always done it, and it's been working so far, why change it? It doesn't make a difference, so why do it? It's not our job. There's almost all of the Farm Bill dollars are already allocated at the federal level, so why try to get more categories? The reality is, in South Carolina, all of our partners were at fault in not being held accountable. So the committee was formed. So in the fall of 2021 at a SCACD, South Carolina Association of Conservation Districts mid-year meeting, which is where all of the conservation partners come together to discuss the different action items that districts should focus on for the year. It was recognized that local work groups were not really effective in the state. Some districts knock it out of the park. Most were not effective, I will say. And so the local work group committee was formed to reinvigorate the local work group process statewide, hold partners accountable, and create needed resources for districts to be successful in hosting local work groups. So at the same time frame of this, in the fall of 2021, the NCPP, the National Conservation Planning Partnership, was starting to have a local work group focus committee. So our committee and that committee kind of was happening in parallel, and one of our committee members served on both of these groups. So we were getting kind of the insider knowledge of what was happening on a national level as we were forming our statewide stuff, which was very convenient. So our local work group committee involves NRCS, which their role, as you guys know, is collecting the results, kind of putting out that bulletin Mike was talking about, utilizing the results for local fund delegation. The Districts Employees Association, we had them present. Their roles are typically the facilitators, the planners, the hosters of the meeting. They do most of the groundwork in our state to get the local work group meetings happening. The association is where a lot of our commissioners are involved. And so we had our commissioners there on the committee, and then also DNR. So prior to this committee being formed, our agency didn't have much of a role in local work groups. We may have attended from time to time if we were invited, but we really didn't hold much of a role in the process. And so through this committee, we kind of formed our own role. We facilitate this committee, and we also collect all of the results statewide and produce a results report of all of the local work groups. And then we are getting those results back out to the state. And the reason we did that is so that partners could be held accountable, so that districts had something to take back and give to the stakeholders who were present at the local work group meeting to show that it was documented and it mattered. And then hopefully to increase networking between districts when they can see maybe their neighboring network or many districts across the state were all reporting similar resource concerns through their local work group process. So this committee developed a lot of resources over the past couple of years. We made a guidance document to be used statewide with some basic ways to host local work group meetings. We had a training video, in-person trainings. We had multiple panels where we were at statewide meetings and just would answer any question local work group related. We sent out many reminder emails, one-on-one consultations. Every local work group meeting DNR was invited to, we tried very hard to attend and attended almost all of the ones we were invited to. And all of these things took a lot of time. And I will say that not all of our districts consult these resources, but some of our districts have consulted these resources and have totally changed or dramatically increased and improved their local work group participation and how they host these local work group meetings. We have faced some challenges over the past couple of years. So at a statewide level, equal and meaningful participation from all of our leadership teams statewide has been a challenge. We have had miscommunications come out, and we have had miscommunications of even just what the committee is within the leadership and the people even participating and serving on the committee. And so we've worked really hard to stress that a unified voice about this topic is what is needed to start to rebuild trust in local work groups in South Carolina. On the local level, it's been a little bit difficult to break tradition in some cases. Some of our commissioners have been a part of their district for decades, and they have done this the same way. for a very long time. And another challenge we have locally is to speak in layman's terms. Mike kind of hinted on this as well. We know our language and we speak a different language than a lot of people. We speak in acronyms, we speak in technical terms. It is a very challenging thing to understand if you were not a part of it. And so we've tried to really stress to our districts to speak in layman's terms. Have someone facilitate the meeting who's able to speak in layman's terms so that the people attending, landowners and people who may not quite understand everything that's happening, so they can understand. And then we can always translate it back to our terminology after the meeting's all said and done. Another big thing that we have had as a challenge is to convince districts of the why, to reestablish the trust in the local work group process in South Carolina and convince our partners that the impact is bigger than just Farm Bill dollars. So the current goals of the committee are continuing to convey the why of the local work group, that the impact is bigger than Farm Bill dollars. For example, and one of the examples we utilize with our meetings and different things that we held to try to explain the impact. One of our districts at a local work group meeting that now has a large public presence that didn't prior, it kept coming up that prescribed fire was an issue. And that has come up at many of their local work group meetings. But with this public presence, they came together and decided to, outside of the local work group meeting, form a prescribed fire council. And so through that, the district on a local level is addressing an issue with natural resource concerns on the land right there that NRCS isn't necessarily able to mitigate. And so through that, they'll have resources, they'll have networking, landowners will be able to get more fire on the ground because of an issue that was brought forward at the local work group that the district was able to take and run with and try to mitigate it. We also are having a letter of encouragement come out to all of the districts from all the leaderships, NRCS, DNR, and the associations, just to encourage them and try to continue to get them to improve their local work group process. We are also starting a new direction with the committee, and that is outreach. That's something that we came up at our last meeting, that we really want to spread awareness of the local work group process and opportunity on a statewide level rather than depending just on districts to do it, because we may be able to reach different parties, whether that's tabling events. We have written magazine articles about the local work group process, just trying to increase the knowledge of local work groups to landowners. Another way we are going to try to do this is through a local work group survey. We want to assess the public's knowledge of local work group, especially the public that's attending district events. So our districts reach a lot of people, but they may not be aware of local work groups or the impact it can have. And so we're starting to develop this survey to have at different district events to try to spread awareness of local work groups. So should you do a local work group committee in your state? I'm not sure, but I would say to make sure you're remaining mission focused. Locally led conservation is the root of why districts exist, and local work groups are a mechanism for locally led conservation. It's so much more than a checkbox. It's so much more than a means for divvying out farm bill funding. It is conservation district's purpose to connect with local landowners and users, gather resource needs from the community, and figure out a way to mitigate those resource problems. So remain positive and mission focused, and maybe just start with communication with the partners. Make sure communication about this process is coming out effectively and united so that it avoids confusion and that everyone is singing to the same sheet of music, whether that means forming a committee or just having a couple of meetings. And then also there's always room for improvement, but meet people where they're at. Like I said in the beginning, I try to encourage our districts to not compare themselves with other districts because the resources are so extremely different. The landscape is so extremely different. And so meet people where they're at. And even if it's the smallest increment of change in the right direction, it's still success. So don't get discouraged if it's a slow process. It certainly has been for us, but it is definitely worth it because locally led conservation is why districts exist. With that, I am wrapped up, and I think we're going to move into our questions portion.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brooke. Okay, so as mentioned, if you have questions now or items to share, please go ahead and put those in the chat box. I'm going to start off, Brooke, just with some things you talked about. First, I thought the public survey idea sounds great, but another piece, you talked about the results report. And one of the things that we often hear about local work groups is the folks that participate, there's not that follow-up or that follow through to what happened with this. I know you're kind of young yet into the process of retooling this, but in addition to just getting that out to the people that participated, do you have some future use for that as far as reflecting on that for the next year? Does it serve as a setup document? Talk a little bit more about that report.
So a couple of other plans we have for that report, using it as a resource, like you said, to get back to stakeholders, to show them, using it as a resource for districts to be able to network and see what other districts are reporting. We also intend to use it as a resource to hold partners accountable. It will be a data bank. We'll be able to see what has been reported year after year after year in every district and where funding has landed year after year in every district, whether or not that report has changed, which in a lot of cases it doesn't, but funding may not go with it. Another way we intend to use the report in-house is that we're going to have this data bank of resource concerns for every county or district in our whole state. And right now, South Carolina does not have a state level cost share program for resource concerns. So if we have the opportunity or decide to pursue funding at the state level for that, we will have all of this data bank to look back on to use as support for why a program is needed.
Sounds good. We have a note in here from Megan from Arkansas, just asking state to state, are these held in one session, and how much time are districts spending on the planning for local work group meetings? Can you speak to that in your states as far as just the time investment, the logistics?
Yeah, I can speak for that in our state. So the majority of our local work groups are probably held in one meeting, probably typically 4-ish hours long, I would guess is roughly what it takes us to get through a good solid agenda with things. But we do have, like I said, we do have follow-up meetings often. So that's not a general rule that it's one time. It basically will hold as many meetings as we need to get to the objectives we want to get to, and to help make sure that the participants feel that they're in a good place. So it's typically probably not going to be more than 2, but it's 1 to 2 meetings. Usually the first one is the longest. The second one might be a couple hours, an hour, a couple hours, just as some follow-up stuff. But that happens quite often, especially with some of these opportunities that we have in our state to provide some proposal ideas to our state leadership for consideration. Those often take some follow-up meetings as well. So that's kind of where we are. But I'd say the majority of them would be one meeting. I think as far as prep goes, I'll probably spend several hours at least. Probably if we have a 4-hour meeting, I'm probably spending a good 4 hours with the chair and the DC ahead of time, not all at once necessarily, but let's go through a draft agenda. Then let's try to pull the resources together that we need. Then let's talk again and see if we want to tweak things, stuff like that. I'd say I probably spend at least as much time prepping with the chair and the district conservationist as we do actually at the meeting. So, but that's spread out over a period of probably a couple months. So it's not a huge. I mean, it's a workload, but it's a manageable workload. I mean, each one of us is probably I'm facilitating about 4 local work groups in our state. Each of the other RMs is doing 1 to 2 probably. So it does take up a chunk of time depending on how many we're facilitating, but it's doable. And I think I think that prep ahead of time is what's helping us to helping our things, our meetings to go better, really. So because a lot of times, like even Brooke said, getting the buy-in that's kind of changing the focus of just the way we've done it for years to probably a better way. It takes some time, even in those prep meetings, for the chair to be able to ask questions. Well, why would we want to do this? Or the district conservationist to go, well, no, why we don't want to waste time doing that. But when we know it's been really important to landowners, so the prep's super important.
Anything to add on that, Brooke?
Ours are extremely different than with Mike's. So our districts, there's 46, and each of them is their own local work group, and each of them is in charge of hosting their own meeting. Through the resources we've developed for them, we encourage them to be thinking about it all year long. I don't know of any districts who has ever had more than one meeting. Some of them, it may be as simple as having their board together and saying, let's do what we did last year. And that's what we were recognizing in 2021 and trying to change. Some of them send out a survey to their network and collect information that way. And some of them may actually host a big networking event that's a few hours long, invite the public, and have a really valuable session with their landowners. And so it varies extremely between our districts.
Very good. One question that came through, you both talked about kind of translating the language. I think you both mentioned acronyms, things like that. How do you go about that so that you can speak, to the local partners, but also pull information together for the reporting you need, or the districts can do that for the reporting they need at the state level?
I guess I can speak on that first. So we have our committee is still working with our federal partner to understand in layman's terms how at the state level they are utilizing the results in their distribution of funds. So we are still working towards that. We're getting closer, I believe. And the local level, our big encouragement there is to choose the right facilitator. Typically, it might not be the chair, it might not be the employee, it might not be the DC, but usually there's someone that's a part of the group that would be good at sharing. And so we really encourage them to choose the right facilitator that is able to speak in layman's terms. And if they are not able to gather the information needed to really give the results to NRCS or DNR at the local work group meeting, and they just gather all of the resource concerns from the public and focus on gathering the resource concerns, having a second meeting to then decipher those resource concerns to compile and translate into NRCS and technical terminology. And so we've encouraged them to maybe have a second meeting that's just a smaller pool that's the district representatives.
Yeah, I really like what Brooke said. It's a lot of the same what we do in Washington as well. I think, getting back to the facilitator part, I think one of the advantages of having a facilitator such as the commission is that, we can be kind of that separate party to kind of slow the meeting down if we have to. We can kind of catch some of those things where we realize we're kind of spinning off the rails with the terminology and such, and really just kind of slow the meeting down. A lot of times we'll stop the meeting and just say, okay, you just heard a lot about equip and whatever local resource concerns and practices and all that. Do you understand? Are there any questions about what that means before we move forward? For us, I think what's really helped is just taking the time to slow the meeting down if we have to, and make sure that folks really have the opportunity to ask questions, and making sure that they know that there's no dumb questions. I think a lot of times folks are scared to ask questions if they are perceived as not knowing something they don't understand. But you can tell when folks are getting glazed over with just the all the stuff that's being thrown at them. So just really been trying to be more intentional and slowing things down, explaining that terminology a bit better, even if it means the meeting takes a little bit longer. But we just want people to feel good about their participation. So.
Question from John from Michigan, and you both touched on this in the bullets in your presentation a little bit, but trying to understand what appeals to conservation districts and being engaged in the local work group process. Obviously, they're involved. And so are you finding it's more the responsibility piece, that it's their role, or is it more the opportunity to influence conservation? What is that appeal for districts that gets them engaged?
Yeah, that's a really good question, John. I think, you know, as we've looked back in the past, I think a lot of times it has been the responsibility. I mean, I remember times where the local work group chair was always asking, you know, does anyone else want to be the chair? Who else wants to be the chair? Type of thing. Because like I put in the chat, in our state where we have these multi-county teams and local work groups, each local work group elects one of those districts to be the chair. And a lot of times, again, even the chairs were not following what the purpose of the local work group was. It was just something they did, something they had to do. So, you know, in the past, I think it was more that just responsibility to hold it. But I think, again, we've been trying to be a little bit more intentional about again, bringing value, understanding the importance of what the input that is provided to the local work group can bring as far as feeding in up to state leadership, to having some influence about how things have happened, to where we're hoping that the shift is going to be more that way. So more, we want to be involved because we want to be able to, through whatever mechanism we can, the local work group is one mechanism to, again, bring value to our constituents. And if we can prioritize these things that are important to our folks, then that's going to pay off better for them. And the local work group is one way to do that. And again, like we said, you know, in addition to the NRCS, we're trying to bring in the other resources that are available as well to those meetings to kind of do the same thing. So we can fit all those puzzle pieces together. It just makes for a much more robust program for folks. So yeah, I think, John, in the past, it was just checked in the box. It was just, we've done this always, we have to, but I think we're trying to, again, bring a better focus on the influence each local work group could have in the state. So.
We have really tried to change the focus from just the allocation of Farm Bill to the responsibility of districts to be there to collect local resource concerns. And so not focus, I mean, that's part of the puzzle, but we have a lot of distrust in the process right now. And so we've really been trying to show the impacts that local work groups can have on a local level with other potential partners and within just a district itself coordinating something. And so trying to change the outlook on the process a little bit from just the federal side.
Sounds good. And that ties in to Tom Gordon's question from Maine. Tom says, locally led is federally fed. How do we convince NRCS to give local work groups a more meaningful role in day-to-day decision-making on federal funding? Any thoughts there?
Yeah. So that, again, that's been one of our challenges. I mean, several years ago, the local work groups had a bit more control. They had a little bit more control over the funding that came in. So they would set their priorities. They could have multiple fund pools designated for their priorities. Over time, though, that kind of influence had diminished to where we were getting more funding out of the national fund pools, and then our state went to a pretty robust statewide funding pool mechanism where we have forest health fund pools, we have nutrient management fund pools, we have soil health fund pools, we have these things that have kind of been more general across the state that they were finding a lot of local work groups were selecting for their local priorities. They rolled those into bigger funding pools that were more statewide. And what that did at the beginning was it's like, well, okay, so we've really lost a lot of control over what the local work group has as far the influence they have over this funding. So again, that kind of helped. I would say in a lot of cases that helped to kind of just it was more of a discouragement to the local work groups in that they had any kind of influence. So again, we've gotten back to where now the local work groups can kind of prioritize a couple of funding pools that are different than those state and national fund pools, which still, again, was just like, again, if we're only having a say over a little bit of this funding, why would we come to these meetings? We've had a little bit of a better path over these last couple of years with the Inflation Reduction Act funding coming in, where districts have been able to have, local groups have been able to have some more say about how that part of the funding is spent, as opposed to the Farm Bill funding. So districts have been able to kind of stretch their legs a little bit. Local work groups have been able to have more robust discussions about how they would prioritize that Inflation Reduction Act funding, which wouldn't necessarily compete with the Farm Bill funding. And we've had some really good proposals come out of that. But for us, again, I think it's been trying to bring value beyond that federal funding to the table that we're hoping is going to help to turn a corner in local work participation. Again, that federal funding is super important. That's the base reason why we're coming, but we can add so much more to that to help make our local work groups more vibrant with that.
So one of the things as I said, the committee has been trying really hard to understand our state's process in the decision-making of the locally spent funds. And we still don't have a very clear picture on that. But one of the things that we have requested and is now been granted for the 2025 year is that we'll have one of our committee member representatives in the room while NRCS is working through the local work group results. So we're going to see firsthand what they're choosing and how they're processing it.
Very good. Well, we're just about out of time and we're out of questions, but I want to thank Mike and Brooke. Both did an excellent job for us today, and both are leaders for our network, and for everybody for attending today's call. Again, this webinar will be posted on the NASCA website. Also make you aware that our next webinar will be July 24th at 1:30 Eastern, same time. So look for the announcements on that website, on that webinar on the NASCA website and in future newsletters. But that's all we have for today. So thank you for everybody for attending.